Sign the papers, Dad. It's our money now. The words landed like a hammer blow, heavier than anything my son had ever said to me in 65 years of life. The papers sat on the dining table between us, thick, official-looking, with clipped edges and highlighted sections where my signature was supposed to go. I stared at the pen in my hand, its tip hovering above the lines as though it might sign itself if I hesitated too long. My son's eyes, once bright with childhood curiosity, were hard now, unyielding, filled with something colder than I wanted to admit. Behind him, my daughter-in-law stood with her arms crossed, chin lifted, as if this moment was already a victory she'd been waiting for. "Go on, Dad," he urged, his voice sharpened with impatience. "This is just practical. You don't need all of this anymore. You've had your life. Now it's time to pass things down." Pass things down. As if my sweat, my long nights, my aching back, and the house I built brick by brick were nothing but trinkets to be redistributed before I'd even had a chance to breathe freely in retirement. My wife sat silently at the far end of the table, her dish towel still in her hands from clearing dinner. She twisted it, eyes darting between me and our son. Her lips parted as though she might say something, but then she closed them again. For 38 years she had been the bridge between us, smoothing arguments, patching hurt feelings. Tonight, though, she looked as lost as I felt. I set the pen down deliberately, the sound of metal on wood echoing louder than I intended. "And what exactly are these papers I'm supposed to sign?" My son leaned forward, tapping the stack. "Power of attorney, transfers of title, joint access to your retirement accounts. It's just easier this way. We can manage things. You don't have to worry about bills, investments, all that paperwork." All that paperwork. My life's work, reduced to all that paperwork. I had spent 43 years rising before dawn, punching the clock, working overtime shifts, and dragging myself home long after my children were in bed. That paperwork represented every sacrificed vacation, every double shift, every time I chose their future over my comfort. I narrowed my eyes. Manage things or control them? His jaw clenched. My daughter-in-law spoke up this time, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's not about control. It's about the future. You're not getting any younger, Dad. Don't you want to make sure things are secure while you're still alive to see it?" Alive. Secure. The words twisted in my gut. They didn't sound like concern. They sounded like urgency. The kind of urgency that comes from people who can't wait for nature to take its course. "Secure for who?" I asked quietly. For a long moment silence stretched across the dining room, broken only by the faint hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. My son's face hardened further. "For us. For your family. It's our money now, Dad. You've had your time. You can't take it with you." I felt my chest tighten, not from age, not from weakness, but from anger that burned hotter than I'd allowed myself to feel in years. I glanced at my wife, hoping for reassurance, but her eyes were downcast, shimmering with unshed tears. The photo frames on the mantel caught my attention. One in particular, a picture of my son at 16, grinning wide as he held up the car keys I'd worked 2 extra jobs to afford for his birthday. I remembered the way he hugged me that night, promising he'd make me proud. Now here he was, demanding I sign away the very foundation I had built for this family. I leaned back in my chair, hands steady on the table. I worked for every dime in those accounts. I built this house with my own hands. And you think you can just take it because I'm 65? He slammed his palm against the table, rattling the silverware still stacked from dinner. "It's not just about you anymore. You've had your life. You don't need this money. We do. We have bills, kids, responsibilities." His wife nodded sharply. Exactly. You sitting on money while we struggle isn't fair. What's the point of hoarding it? You're just being selfish. Selfish. The word cut deeper than I expected. Selfish, after decades of sacrifice. Selfish after covering his debts, paying off his loans, helping with the down payment on his first house. Selfish after watching my own dreams dissolve just so he could chase his. I pushed the papers back across the table, my voice calm but ironclad. I won't sign. His face darkened, lips curling in disgust. You'll regret this, old man. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. The silence that followed was heavier than his threat. They stood, gathered the papers with sharp, angry motions, and stormed out, heels on hardwood, front door slamming with a finality that shook the frame. The house fell silent, the echoes of their departure lingering like smoke. My wife's hand trembled as she set the twisted towel on the table. She looked at me with pleading eyes, but I only stared at the empty doorway. Something had shifted tonight. Something permanent. And though I didn't know it yet, the real storm hadn't even begun. Not until the bank called, asking why my name was still there. The house felt cavernous after they left, as if their anger had expanded into every corner, leaving a residue I couldn't shake. I stood by the door for a long time, my hand still resting on the brass handle. Through the glass, I could see my son's car backing out of the driveway, tires screeching against asphalt, his taillights glowing red like a warning. My wife, Ellen, hovered a few feet behind me, her voice low. William! I turned to her slowly, seeing the unease etched into her face. 38 years of marriage had taught me every line, every shadow of expression. She wasn't just worried about our son's temper. She was worried about me, about what this meant for the family we had built, the trust we had believed unshakable. I said nothing at first. Words felt useless in the thick air of betrayal. Instead, I walked back to the dining table. The papers were gone, but the impression they'd left lingered, the indentations where they'd been pressed flat. The pen, still lying abandoned, its tip stained with the faintest ink mark where I had almost signed. Ellen followed me into the room. Maybe he didn't mean it like that, she whispered, twisting her hands the way she did whenever she was caught between mother and wife. Maybe he's just desperate. Desperate doesn't draft legal documents, I muttered. Her eyes flickered to mine. She knew I was right. I sat heavily in the chair, my joints protesting, though the ache in my bones was nothing compared to the heaviness pressing against my chest. I thought of all the years I had spent ensuring he wouldn't have to struggle the way I had. I thought of overtime shifts, calloused hands, missed dinners, and the way Ellen and I had argued quietly at night about bills so the children wouldn't hear. And this was the repayment, a demand to hand it all over before I was even gone. Ellen reached out and touched my shoulder. He's our son, William. I nodded, staring at the photo on the mantel again, that smiling 16-year-old boy with his first car keys. I had believed then that I was building a future for him, a foundation he could stand on proudly. But somewhere along the way, that foundation had turned into a crutch, and now, it seemed, a weapon. I know, I said softly. He's our son, but he's not acting like one. The silence stretched again, broken only by the creak of the old house as it settled. In that silence, my mind wouldn't stop replaying his words. It's our money now, not mine, not ours as a family, theirs. That night, Ellen tried to resume our normal routine. Tea at the kitchen table, the crossword puzzle spread open, the hum of the dishwasher in the background. But everything felt altered. The kitchen, once our sanctuary, felt like enemy territory where words could no longer shield us. When we went to bed, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My wife's breathing was soft beside me, but my mind was restless, chasing memories like old ghosts. I remembered holding my son as a baby, promising silently that I would give him the life I never had. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike, steadying his handlebars while he wobbled down the street. I remembered paying his college tuition, even when it meant cashing in bonds I'd been saving for retirement. I had always said yes. And tonight was the first time I'd said no. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Somewhere closer, a clock ticked steadily, each second a reminder that time was moving forward whether my family fractured or not. In the darkness, I whispered to myself, though it might as well have been to Ellen, or to the son who no longer heard me. I worked my whole life for dignity, and I won't sign it away. The next morning, the house felt colder. Ellen moved around the kitchen, the scrape of dishes sharper than usual, the smell of coffee weaker, as if the tension had seeped into everything. She tried to talk about errands, about groceries, about the weather, but every word bent back toward the silence we didn't want to touch. I carried my mug into the living room and sat heavily in the recliner, staring out the window at the neighbors across the street. The Hendersons were trimming their hedges, their kids laughing as they tossed a ball in the driveway. A normal family. A family where money hadn't poisoned the bonds between parent and child. I wondered how long we could pretend to be normal ourselves. For 3 days, my son didn't call. No texts, no visits, not even a curt message through Ellen. For a man who usually phoned every week with a new emergency, the silence was deafening. Ellen thought maybe he was cooling off, that things would settle. But I felt something different in that absence. It wasn't peace. It was plotting. On the 4th day, the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first, but the voice on the other end made my stomach twist. Mr. Carr, this is James Porter from Midland Bank. We're calling to confirm a recent request to alter the signatories on your accounts. My grip on the receiver tightened until my knuckles whitened. Ellen turned toward me from the sink, sensing the change in my expression. Alter the signatories? I repeated slowly. Yes, the banker replied. Your son initiated paperwork last week, but since your name is still legally primary, we need your confirmation before proceeding. The room tilted for a moment, the air rushing out of my lungs. My son hadn't just asked me to sign those papers. He'd already acted as though I had. And in that instant, I knew this wasn't desperation. This was theft, dressed in family clothing. Alter the signatories, I repeated, buying time while my heartbeat tried to slow into something human. The mug in my left hand tilted, cooling coffee sloshing against porcelain. Ellen watched me from the sink, a dish towel frozen mid-air, her face asking questions my mouth wasn't ready to answer. Yes, sir, the man said, professional and steady. My name is James Porter, Senior Account Manager at Midland Bank. We received a packet last week requesting the addition of a new controlling signer and the removal of secondary verification requirements. There was also a draft request to change your correspondence address and phone contact. Because your name is currently primary on the account, none of those changes can be made without your explicit authorization. I cleared my throat. And who submitted the packet? A soft pause, the sound of keys clicking on his side of the world. The file lists an initiator, Daniel Carr. My son's name bloomed in the room like smoke. It filled my lungs and stung my eyes. For a moment, I could see him again at 7 years old, pitching a baseball too hard in the backyard and breaking the kitchen window, crying before I could even be angry. He had confessed then, a snotty apology, sticky cheeks, small hands that reached for me. Children tell on themselves, grown men conceal. I see, I said, and the words tasted metallic. What exactly did he try to change? To be precise, Mr. Porter said, the packet asked to add Mr. Daniel Carr as a controlling signer, to enable him to move funds without co-authorization, to consolidate your brokerage transfers into your checking for ease of management, and to redirect statements to a P.O. box. There is also a pre-filled durable power of attorney form, unsigned, referenced as to follow. Pre-filled. My son had expected my pen to travel exactly where he placed it, like a well-trained horse at dressage. He hadn't considered the possibility that the old man might set the reins down. "And nothing has been actioned?" I asked, my voice steadier than my hands. "Nothing," he said. "Our fraud prevention protocol flagged the mismatch. Because your name remains primary, we're required to speak to you directly. If you like, we can place a precautionary hold on profile changes and add additional verification measures." I looked at Ellen. She had moved closer without realizing it, the towel still twisted in her hands, the way she twists wedding rings when the conversation turns to money or grief. I put the call on speaker and set the phone gently on the kitchen counter between us. "Mr. Porter," I said, "what measures are available?" "We can add a verbal passcode to your profile, require in-person ID for signatory changes, enable step-up authentication on transfers above a threshold you set, and send duplicate statements to your home and your email to prevent silent address changes. We can also remove any non-essential authorized users if you wish." I swallowed. 20 years ago, I'd told myself that making my son an authorized user was teaching him responsibility. Maybe I had only been teaching him access. "Let's do it," I said. "All of it." He proceeded methodically, a man who had walked similar families through similar storms. "What would you like your passcode to be?" I looked at Ellen. She mouthed something I'd forgotten parts of and never will again. 1984, the year we bought this house, when she painted the dining room walls a brave yellow, and I slept on drop cloths to finish the trim before the kids woke up. 1984, I said. "Noted," Mr. Porter replied. "Next, transfer threshold?" I thought of the way Daniel had once said, half a joke, half a knife. "Dad, what's the point of saving if you never spend?" I had smiled then, because I didn't know that one day he'd ask me to spend myself. 10,000, I said. "Anything above that calls me and requires in-person confirmation." "Done. And authorized users?" "Remove all," I said, surprising myself with how quickly it came. "If someone needs help with groceries, he can ask like a son." Ellen exhaled, the smallest of sounds, like a kettle that had finally decided not to boil over. "There is one more thing, Mr. Carr," Mr. Porter said. "We can put a note on file. No power of attorney accepted unless original, notarized, presented in person by the principal. It's not typical, but in cases where there may be family disagreement, do it," I said, "please. Consider it done. For your peace of mind, I placed a 90-day profile change hold. Any attempt to adjust addresses, emails, or phone numbers will trigger an alert to you and to our internal team. If you'd like to come in, I can meet you personally to review everything." "I'll be there tomorrow," I said. "Thank you, Mr. Porter." "My pleasure, sir. I'm sorry for the circumstances, but I'm glad we could protect you. We'll send a secure summary to your email." The call ended. The kitchen didn't move for a long moment. It stood with us, held its breath, listened to the refrigerator hum and to the kind of silence that doesn't soothe, the kind that shows you where your walls are soft. Ellen put the towel down. "He was going to take it," she said, not accusing, not even quite surprised, just naming the animal in our living room. "He was going to take it and tell you it was for your own good." I nodded. The world sharpened. The clean line of the counter edge, the way sunlight made a rectangle on the floor where Daniel used to leave his backpack, the nick in the cupboard door from when I bumped it, bringing home a cake for his 16th birthday. Memory has a cruel habit of staying sweet. "Ellen," I said, "I need to get my blue folder." She knew the one, the old leather portfolio I kept in the office, swollen with receipts and statements and small dog-eared documents that prove a life, title transfers, tax returns, tuition bills paid, when the deadline was already breathing down our necks. I carried it back to the table and laid it open like a ledger of promises kept. There they were, fossilized commitments. A cashier's check for Daniel's first apartment deposit, a mechanic's invoice from the year he lost his job, and I paid for a new transmission because he had interviews, a wire transfer labeled bridge loan that never bridged anything, 2 bank drafts for emergency, which is how we spell again. I flipped through the pages and felt each one land like a step down a staircase I hadn't realized was leading into a basement. Ellen sat across from me, hands folded as if in church. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I said yes too many times," I answered quietly. "That every yes taught him a new language he can now speak without shame." She nodded, eyes shining but clear. "What do we do now?" "We keep the roof over our heads and the dignity in our names," I said. "Tomorrow I'll see Mr. Porter in person. Then I'm calling Margaret." Ellen knew that name too, Margaret Summers, who had shepherded us through wills and home refinancing and the minor legal scaffolding of a long marriage. Saying her name out loud felt like drawing a boundary on a map I had left unguarded too long. I closed the folder. The cover cracked softly. Leather gets tired carrying the past. I stood, and my knees did what knees do at 65. They argued, then complied. In the living room, a frame on the mantel had tilted sometime in the night. I straightened it, then paused, fingers resting on the glass. It was the photo of Daniel at 16, with the car keys, bright grin, sunlight in his hair. For a breath, I could feel his arm around my shoulders. The way he'd leaned in, the weight of trust, as natural as gravity. I set the frame back and stepped away. The phone lay silent on the counter, screen black, a small mirror that reflected the ceiling light and the lines across my forehead. Somewhere, my son believed this was already won, that an old man would yield to the frictionless logic of younger need. Somewhere, he was telling himself he was saving me from paperwork. I poured the cold coffee down the sink, ran the tap until the water went clear, rinsed the cup twice. It's remarkable how ordinary tasks can hold you upright when your house is a little on fire. When I turned off the faucet, the only sound left was the clock in the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. Time marking the space between the father I had been and the man I was about to become. Ellen touched my arm. "We'll do this together," she said. "We will," I answered. Then softer, a promise to no one who could hear it but me. No more signatures for strangers. Tomorrow, the bank would harden its walls. After that, the law would move into the rooms I could no longer patrol alone. For tonight, I let the house settle, and I let myself understand. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a bad week. It was a plan. And plans can be undone. The following evening, the silence broke. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of waiting for a storm you already smelled in the air. Ellen was folding laundry in the den when the phone rang, and even before she glanced at the caller ID, I knew. Some names carry their own tone. "Dad," my son's voice spilled through the line, falsely casual. "I heard you've been talking to the bank." I stayed very still, letting him feel the weight of his own words. Silence unsettles men like Daniel more than shouting. Finally, I said, "Yes, they called me." He sighed dramatically. "Dad, you're overreacting. Those forms were just paperwork. Convenience. You're making it sound sinister." Sinister. The word settled heavy. "Changing signatories without telling me is more than convenience," I said. "It's fraud." He laughed lightly, a sound rehearsed. "Come on, Dad, fraud? We're family. It's not like I'm stealing from you. It's our money anyway. You've said it yourself. You worked for us, for the family. I'm just moving things along." I felt the pen in my mind again, hovering over that line on the papers. One stroke of ink, and I would have vanished into his version of convenience. "You didn't wait for me to sign," I said. "Because you're stubborn," he snapped, the mask falling. "Because you cling to control. You don't even know how to manage online accounts anymore. You let bills stack up on the counter for days before mailing them. It's irresponsible at your age. I'm trying to save you from embarrassing yourself." I nearly laughed at that. The irony of a man who hadn't paid his own mortgage without my help in years lecturing me about responsibility. "Daniel," I said, voice steady, "the bank thought it was suspicious, too." "Do you know what that means? It means what you did wasn't just a son helping his father. It means what you did was wrong." Silence on his end now. Not long, just enough for me to know the words had landed. Then, soft and venomous, "You're going to regret treating me like an enemy." The line went dead. Ellen had been watching from the doorway, her hands clutching a towel she'd been folding. "William," she whispered, "what is happening to him?" I shook my head slowly. "It's not what's happening to him. It's what he's become." That night the memories came again, but they were sharper now, barbed. Not just the boy with the car keys, but the man who had called at 2 a.m. begging for a wire transfer. The man who had leaned on me to co-sign loans, promising he'd pay me back. Promises that dissolved like smoke. I had said yes, too many times. And my son had learned to build a language out of those yeses, a language where ours meant mine, and where family meant obligation. The next morning, Ellen set my coffee in front of me. Her voice was soft. "What if he comes back?" "He will," I said. "And he won't come alone." He came on the 3rd day. I was sitting in the living room with the paper spread open when I heard the crunch of tires on the driveway. Ellen was at the window before I even moved. She turned, her face pale. "He's here." And he wasn't alone. The car door slammed, then another. Heavy footsteps marched toward the porch, the rhythm of a man not coming to talk, but to take. When the doorbell rang, it wasn't a chime. It was a command. I opened it to find Daniel and his wife standing like a 2-person army. She was dressed sharp, hair pulled back, papers clutched to her chest. He didn't bother with a smile. "Dad," he said, his voice already raised, "we need to straighten this out. You embarrassed me at the bank." "Embarrassed you?" I repeated, my voice quiet. "Yes," his wife snapped, stepping forward. "Do you know how ridiculous it looked when the bank called you instead of processing his request? You made it seem like he was some kind of criminal. To his own father." I kept my hand on the doorframe. "I didn't make him seem like anything. He did that himself." Daniel's eyes flared. "Dad, don't do this. Don't turn this into a war. Just sign the papers. We'll manage everything. You won't have to worry about bills, about keeping track. We'll take care of you." "Take care of me," I repeated softly, though the words felt like poison. "Or take what's mine while I'm still alive to see it." Ellen had come up behind me now, her hand on my arm. I could feel her trembling, but I didn't step back. "You raised me to take responsibility," Daniel pressed. "Well, this is me doing it. You're clinging to control because you can't admit you're old." "Old?" The word hung there, heavier than all the others. Old was the justification. Old was the excuse. Old was the weapon. I studied him, really studied him. The boy who once leaned on me to steady his bike had become a man trying to push me out of my own house. And behind him, his wife's eyes gleamed, already counting what she believed was hers. I stepped forward, closing the gap between us. You think I'm too old to see what's happening here? You think being 65 means I can't recognize theft when it stares me in the face? Let me tell you something, son. I may be old, but I am not blind, and I am not signing." The silence that followed was a chasm. His wife's lips curled. Daniel's fists clenched. And for the first time, I saw something in his eyes I had prayed I'd never see in my child. Not desperation, not need, but entitlement. I closed the door slowly, deliberately, the click of the lock final. Inside, Ellen's voice broke. "William, what if they keep pushing? What if he tries again?" I turned toward the mantel, toward the photos that had stood for decades. One frame had tipped again, the same photo of Daniel at 16. I straightened it, but this time my hand lingered. "He already tried," I said quietly. "And now, it's my turn." I set the photo face down on the mantel. The boy he once was, frozen forever in that picture, no longer had a place here. And in that act, small and quiet, I knew. The father who always said yes was always gone. That night the house carried their voices long after they'd left. I sat in the dark living room, the faint light from the street lamp casting long shadows across the mantel. The photo of Daniel, still face down, seemed to mock me. A silent reminder that the boy I had raised was gone, and in his place stood a man who saw me not as a father, but as a wallet. Ellen patted in softly, a mug of chamomile tea in her hand. She set it on the coffee table beside me. Her eyes searched mine, gentle but firm. "What are we going to do, William?" I rubbed my temples, feeling the weight of every year pressed down. For decades, I thought protecting him meant paying his way, covering debts, making excuses. But that's not protection. That's surrender. Ellen sat across from me, her hands clasped together. "You're talking like you've already decided something." I leaned back, the leather chair creaking under me. "I have. Tomorrow I'm going to see Margaret." Ellen blinked. "Margaret Summers?" "Yes," I said. "She's handled our legal work for 15 years. She'll know what to do. Power of attorney, accounts, inheritance, all of it needs to be locked down." Her eyes softened, a mixture of relief and sadness. You're cutting him off." I exhaled slowly. "No, Ellen. He cut himself off when he tried to take what wasn't his. I'm just sealing the door he left open." The room went quiet again, but it was a different quiet now. Not the suffocating silence of betrayal, but the calm before decisive action. My anger had cooled into something steadier, more dangerous. I stood, joints groaning in protest, and crossed to my office. The blue leather portfolio sat on the bookshelf, swollen with decades of paper. I brought it to my desk, flipped it open, and began to sort through the evidence of 30 years of emergencies. Bank transfers labeled urgent, checks for just this once, loans for temporary help. Every page a breadcrumb in the trail that had led here. I wrote down dates, amounts, signatures. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was building a case. Ellen came to the doorway, watching silently. She didn't stop me. She knew, as I did, that something had shifted. The man who had always said yes had finally remembered that no was also a father's word. Sometimes the only word that saves a family. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks, because I had a plan. Margaret's office sat on the 3rd floor of a granite building downtown, its lobby lined with the kind of potted plants that never seemed to die. The secretary greeted me with polite efficiency and led me down a hall where the carpet muffled every step. "William," Margaret said warmly as I entered. She rose from behind her desk, adjusting her glasses. "It's been a while. I wish it were under better circumstances." I placed the blue folder on her mahogany desk. "My son tried to remove me from my accounts without my knowledge. He showed up at my house with papers. Power of attorney, property transfers, all of it. The bank stopped him. But I know he'll try again." Margaret's expression tightened, professional calm sliding into place. "You did the right thing coming here. Tell me everything." I walked her through it. The confrontation at the table, the bank call, the attempted intimidation at my front door. Ellen's hand found mine halfway through, her presence steady, though her knuckles were pale. Margaret listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes. When I finished, she leaned back, eyes sharp. "William, this isn't just a family disagreement anymore. It's attempted financial exploitation. Courts take this very seriously." I nodded. "What can I do?" "First," she said, flipping open a legal pad, "we secure your finances. We'll file paperwork removing him as an authorized user on all accounts. We'll establish a legal block on any power of attorney filings unless presented in person by you notarized. Next, we address your estate. You mentioned grandchildren?" My chest tightened. "Emma and Jack, 8 and 6. "Then we redirect," she said firmly. "We create an educational trust in their names. Your assets will fund their schooling, their futures. But your son and his wife will have no access. None." Ellen's breath caught. "But will he know?" Margaret looked at us evenly. "He will, eventually, and he won't like it, which is why we also file for legal protections, a restraining order if he continues harassment, documentation of every incident. William, you are not powerless. You are protected." Her words landed heavy and right. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the balance tilt back toward me. I signed the first set of papers with a steadiness that surprised me. Not the reluctant ink stroke of a man cornered, but the deliberate line of a man reclaiming his dignity. When we left Margaret's office, Ellen squeezed my hand. "I haven't seen you walk that tall in years," she said softly. I looked up at the sky, the city buzzing around us. "That's because for the first time in years, I'm not carrying him anymore." It didn't take long. 2 days after I left Margaret's office, the storm arrived. Ellen and I were sitting in the kitchen, late afternoon sunlight streaming across her herb garden on the sill. The peace we'd begun to taste was thin, fragile, like glass that could shatter at the smallest vibration. And then we heard the tires, the screech of a car pulling too fast into our driveway, doors slamming hard enough to rattle the windows, voices, raised, angry, familiar. Ellen's hand froze on the teapot. She didn't need to say his name. The doorbell rang once, sharp and impatient, followed immediately by pounding fists. I rose slowly, steadying myself on the table, not because I was weak, but because I wanted to move with deliberate calm. Anger moves quickly. Strength moves slow. "Stay here," I told Ellen. "No," she whispered, her voice firmer than I expected. "We face this together." I opened the door. Daniel stood on the porch, face flushed, chest heaving. Behind him, his wife loomed like a second shadow, her eyes gleaming with cold triumph. "You think you're clever, old man?" Daniel's voice cut sharp through the air. "You went behind my back, didn't you? You ran to Margaret. You changed the accounts." I kept my hand on the doorframe, unflinching. "I secured what was mine. What was yours?" His laugh was bitter, ugly. "It's not just yours, Dad. It's ours. You're too selfish to admit it. You've been hoarding money while we're drowning. And now you humiliate me at the bank? Do you know how that looked?" His wife stepped forward, waving a sheaf of papers. "He's unstable," she spat, "clinging to control. We tried to help him, and he paints us like villains. If anyone knew how he treated us—" "Enough." My voice was quiet, but it cut through her words like glass. They both froze, surprised. For years my voice had bent under their demands. Tonight it did not. I stepped closer until I was framed in the doorway. the house behind me like a fortress. You didn't try to help me. You tried to erase me. You stood in my dining room and told me to sign my life away. And when I didn't, you went to the bank hoping your last name would be enough to replace my signature. That's not help. That's theft. Daniel's jaw worked, rage flickering in his eyes. You're going to regret this, Dad. When you're old and sick and need someone to take care of you. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. I already regret something, Daniel. I regret raising a man who uses his own father's age as a weapon. But don't mistake me. I may be 65, but I am not helpless. Not anymore. Behind me, I felt Ellen's presence, steady as an anchor. Her hand touched my shoulder, a silent show of strength. Daniel's wife sneered. Fine. Keep your precious accounts. But don't expect to see your grandchildren again. Emma and Jack will grow up without you. That's your punishment. Once, those words would have buckled my knees. Once, I would have written a check before I let them slip away. But tonight, they sounded hollow. I straightened, my voice calm. If you think using children as hostages makes you strong, then you've already lost them. Because Emma and Jack deserve better than to learn that love is a bargaining chip. Keep them from me if you choose. But don't think for a second I'll buy my way into their lives. The shock on their faces was almost satisfying. They had expected fear. They had expected surrender. They found neither. Daniel's wife hissed, You'll regret this. I let a thin smile cross my lips. Number. The regret will be yours. I closed the door slowly, deliberately, the latch clicking into place. Their pounding fist came again, muffled now by wood and steel, but I didn't open it. Not this time. Through the window, I watched as they stormed back to their car, Daniel's anger shaking his hands, his wife's face twisted in venom. They revved the engine like teenagers and tore down the street, leaving the smell of rubber in their wake. Ellen exhaled, her shoulders sagging. William. I took her hand. It's begun, I said softly. They thought they could break me. Now they'll learn what consequences look like. The house was quiet again after they left. But it wasn't the same kind of silence. This time it wasn't heavy or suffocating. This time it was sharp, like the air right before a storm breaks, charged and electric. Ellen sat at the kitchen table, her face pale, but her eyes burning with something fierce. William, she said softly, what if they come back? I pulled out the chair across from her and lowered myself down slowly, my knees groaning as always. They will, I said. But next time they'll find I'm not standing alone. She tilted her head. What do you mean? I reached for the leather folder I'd brought back from Margaret's office and laid it flat on the table. I mean, Ellen, that for 30 years, I've been their insurance policy. Every mistake, every bad decision, I covered it. I kept telling myself I was protecting family. But what I was really doing was teaching them that consequences didn't apply. I opened the folder, spreading the papers across the table. Bank statements, canceled checks, wire transfers, each one a scar I'd covered with silence. Ellen's eyes scanned the pages, her hands tightening around the teacup in front of her. It's worse when you see it all together, she whispered. I nodded. And tonight, I'm ending it. Not with shouting, not with fists on the door, with signatures. The right kind this time. I logged into the bank portal on my laptop, the familiar hum of the machine filling the quiet. The blue light from the screen painted the room in an eerie glow. My fingers moved steadily across the keys, not with the trembling hesitation of a man afraid, but with the calm authority of someone who had finally remembered he was in control. First, I checked the account profile. Daniel's name had already been stripped as an authorized user, just as Mr. Porter had promised. The confirmation sat there in black and white, official and absolute. "Goodbye, son," I murmured under my breath. Next, I moved to the recurring transfers. For years, I had set up automatic payments for his rent, his car insurance, even his credit card bills. I had told myself it was easier than fighting every month, easier than watching him flounder. Click, cancel, click, cancel. Each cancellation was a small exhale, a chain slipping loose from my shoulders. Ellen came to stand behind me, resting her hand lightly on my shoulder. I could feel the warmth of her palm, steadying me, reminding me this wasn't cruelty. It was necessity. When the last payment vanished from the screen, I leaned back and let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. 30 years of yes, I said. Undone in 30 minutes. But it wasn't finished. Not yet. The next morning I sat once more in Margaret's office. She slid a fresh set of documents across her desk, her expression calm but resolute. "As of today, William, your will is amended. The trust for Emma and Jack is established. Every cent you leave behind will go into their education fund, managed by an independent trustee with no access to Daniel or his wife." I picked up the pen and signed, each stroke slow and deliberate. My name on those papers was not surrender this time. It was protection. Margaret gathered the pages neatly. "You've done the right thing. This way your grandchildren are secure, and Daniel has no leverage left." As I stood to leave, Ellen slipped her arm through mine. She was smiling, though her eyes were glassy. "You feel lighter," she said softly. "I am," I replied, "because now the burden isn't mine to carry. It's his." That evening I sat at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee. The house was peaceful, Ellen humming faintly as she cleaned up dinner. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring with another crisis, another plea. And when it did ring, and Daniel's name flashed across the caller ID, I smiled. Because this time, I was ready. The phone buzzed across the kitchen counter, Daniel's name glowing on the screen like a warning flare. Ellen froze mid-step, a dish still in her hands. For years we had both flinched when that name appeared, bracing ourselves for the storm of excuses that always followed. But tonight I didn't flinch. I answered, pressing the speaker button so Ellen could hear every word. "Dad!" Daniel's voice came fast, sharp with panic. "What the hell did you do?" "My car payment bounced this morning. The credit card company called me. They said the auto pay was canceled. Did you do this?" I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee before answering. "I did." A stunned pause. Then the sound of him slamming something, a fist on a table maybe. "You can't do that. Those were agreements. You've been paying those for years." "Not anymore," I said, my voice calm. "Those were gifts, Daniel, not contracts. And gifts can end." He was breathing heavily now, anger turning into desperation. "Dad, you don't understand. We're drowning here. The bills, the mortgage, the kids' school tuition. I counted on that money. And I counted on raising a son who wouldn't try to steal from me while I was still alive," I replied evenly. "Looks like we're both disappointed." His wife's voice cut in suddenly, shrill and furious from the background. "We have a family, you selfish old man. What kind of grandfather lets his own grandchildren suffer? Do you want them to think you're heartless? Do you want them to go without because you're clinging to control?" I let the words hang, let their venom spread across the kitchen like smoke. Then I spoke quietly, each syllable deliberate. "Emma and Jack will never go without. Their education, their futures, all of it is secured in a trust. But that trust doesn't have your name on it. Not yours, not your wife's, only theirs." Silence. Then Daniel's voice, lower now, strained. You cut me out?" "I didn't cut you out," I corrected. "You did. The moment you went to the bank behind my back, the moment you treated me like a signature instead of a father, you ended it. I just made it official." The line went quiet, except for the sound of his breathing, ragged and uneven. For the first time, I could hear the weight of consequences settling on his shoulders. The arrogance, the entitlement, stripped away, leaving only fear. "Dad," he said finally, his voice breaking, "you can't do this to me. I'm your son." I stared at the mantel, at the photo I had turned face down. "I was your father when I worked double shifts to pay for your college. I was your father when I pulled you out of debt. I was your father when I covered the mortgage you fell behind on. But when you looked me in the eye and told me to sign my life away, you stopped being my son in that moment. You became a stranger." Ellen's hand found mine on the table. Her grip was firm, steady. On the other end of the line, his wife shouted something muffled, angry. Daniel's voice cracked as he tried again, softer this time. "Please, Dad, just one more month. Just until I get back on my feet." I closed my eyes briefly. How many times had I heard those same words? One more month, one more loan, one more chance. And every time it was never the last. I opened my eyes, my voice cold, but final. "There are no more months, Daniel. Not for me." The silence that followed was different from the silence of anger. It was the silence of a man who had just realized the ground beneath him had collapsed. Finally, he whispered, almost to himself, "What am I supposed to do?" I took another sip of coffee, letting the bitterness anchor me. "Learn," I said. "For once in your life, learn." And then I ended the call. The kitchen was still. Ellen set down the dish she'd been holding, tears shining in her eyes. But when she looked at me, there was pride there too. Pride in the man who had finally chosen dignity over endless surrender. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the phone on the counter, its screen dark and silent. For the first time in years, I didn't dread its ring. Because I knew, whatever storm Daniel tried to summon next, I had already built the walls to withstand it. The call didn't end it. If anything, it lit a fire under him. 2 days later, I came back from walking the yard to find a letter tucked under my front door. Official looking, printed on cheap legal stationery. The words were bluster, dressed up as authority. Failure to provide financial support may be grounds for legal intervention. I chuckled bitterly. He'd gone to some bargain lawyer, hoping to scare me into compliance. I carried the letter into the kitchen and dropped it on the table in front of Ellen. She skimmed it, then looked up, her brows arched. "He really thinks he can force you?" I shook my head. "Margaret will have fun with this." That afternoon, I drove back downtown. Margaret read the letter carefully, then set it aside with a smile that carried no warmth. "Empty threats," she said. "Your son has no legal claim over your money while you're alive. And as for failure to provide support, he's a grown man, not a dependent child. If he files anything, it'll be dismissed before it sees a courtroom." She leaned forward, tapping the folder in front of her. "But this gives us something useful. Evidence of harassment. Combined with his earlier attempts, it strengthens your position if we need to seek a restraining order." I nodded slowly, feeling both vindicated and weary. "So what's the next step?" "We document everything," Margaret said. "Every call, every letter, every threat. And if he comes to your door again, you don't answer. You call me. You call the police if needed. This isn't your fight anymore, William. It's the law's." For the first time in weeks, my chest loosened. The weight was shifting off me. When I got home, Ellen had dinner waiting. Roast chicken, the smell filling the house like an old memory. We sat at the table quietly, the letter still between us. "You're not afraid?" she asked finally. "No," I said, cutting into the chicken. I'm not, because for once he's the one without options. It happened on a Sunday evening. The sky outside was gray, the kind of muted light that makes the world feel heavy. Ellen and I were sitting in the living room when headlights flared across the window. Daniel's car. My jaw tightened. Ellen's hand found mine. "Don't open the door," she whispered. The pounding came anyway, harder than before, voices shouting, his then hers, shrill and demanding. "You can't do this to us, Dad. We're your family. You can't just cut us off." I didn't move. I let the sound echo through the house, let it hit the walls and fall flat. When the pounding didn't stop, I reached for the phone and dialed Margaret first. She picked up, quickly, her voice calm. "He's there?" "Yes." "Don't engage. I'll notify the police. Stay inside." So I did. Ellen and I sat in the living room, the weight of decades of parenting pressing against the sounds of fists on wood. For years I would have opened that door, argued, reasoned, begged for peace. But tonight I stayed still. The sirens came quicker than I expected. Red and blue lights cut through the gray, washing across the walls. The shouting outside turned into muttering, then protest as uniformed officers intervened. Through the window, I watched as Daniel's arms flailed, his wife screeching. The neighbors gathered at the edges of their lawns, whispering, watching. The officers handled it firmly, separating them, calming them. Then one came to my door. I opened it slowly, Ellen beside me. "Mr. Carr?" the officer asked. "Yes." "Your attorney briefed us. You want them removed from the property?" I glanced past him. My son's eyes met mine across the yard. For the first time he looked small. Not powerful, not entitled, just small. "Yes," I said. "I do." The officer nodded. "We'll escort them off. If they return, it's trespassing. Do you want to press for a restraining order?" "Yes," I said again, my voice steady. "File it." The officer's nod was brisk. "Consider it done." The car doors slammed, their voices trailing as they were driven away. The street fell quiet again, the neighbors dispersing slowly. Inside, Ellen leaned against me, her shoulders trembling with relief. "It's over," she whispered. "Not over," I corrected softly, watching the fading lights. "But finished." Weeks passed. No more calls. No more pounding fists. No more letters. Margaret confirmed the restraining order had been filed. Daniel couldn't come near us without risking arrest. He hadn't tried, maybe because the law had finally spoken louder than his entitlement. Maybe because the well had run dry. The house felt lighter now. Ellen laughed more, hummed as she moved through the rooms. Even the air seemed easier to breathe. One afternoon, I found myself back at the mantel. The photo of Daniel still lay face down, the dust gathering on its edges. I picked it up, studied the frozen grin of the 16-year-old boy I'd once believed would carry our name proudly. I set it gently in a drawer, closing it with finality. That boy was gone. Instead, I framed a different picture, Emma and Jack in their school uniforms, grinning with missing teeth, eyes bright with innocence. I placed it in the center of the mantel. "This," I said softly to the empty room, "is who it's all for." That night, I sat with Ellen on the porch as the sun set, the sky painted in shades of orange and gold. She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. "You protected us. You protected them." I nodded slowly, feeling the truth settle deep inside me. For too long, I believed saying yes was love. But tonight I know the truth. Love is sometimes the strength to say no, to draw the line, to save what really matters. The cicadas sang in the twilight. The air was warm. And for the first time in years, I felt not old, not tired, but free.